All this talk about lesson planning is making me hungry. I don't know about you, but that looks like a pretty juicy looking sandwich. But it wouldn't look like a sandwich at all without the stuff in the middle. And so, even though we've talked about coming up with a good opener and a good closure, it's the stuff in the middle that's the meat of the lesson. So we have already gone through the first two stages of backward design, and we are here at this bottom talking about planning learning experiences and instruction that's going to fit in with getting the desired results that we want and getting the students ready so that we can get this acceptable evidence. So, what do we need to have in the middle? First of all, there has to be clear alignment with the objectives. So you can't just pick out a bunch of stuff to do that you think would be fun. It's got to fit with the purpose. It's got to be logical. The content has to be accurate. So all these things right here describe describe the activities that are in the lesson. That they're aligned, that they're logical, they're accurate. But what are those activities and how do you choose them? Well, that's what we're talking about today. One of the things that you can do is that you can think about what types of activities are the most beneficial. So if you think about, I love this Dale Egg, Eggerdale cone of learning. And when you look at this, it has to do with how much students retain after 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, what do they remember about the lesson? And if all they did was read it, or hear it, or see it, that's not enough. But as more experience that you get participating in a discussion, so the more active the student is, then the more likely they're going to remember what they've learned. So when you're thinking about your lesson plan, I want you to think not in terms of what you're doing, but the activities that the students are going to do, how they're going to be engaged in the material. We have some guidance and help from Tennessee's model for evaluations, and it tells us that in presenting instructional content, that you want visuals, examples, analogies, labels for new concepts and ideas, effective modeling, good communication, again, logically sequenced and segmented. The information needs to be there. Um, and you also don't want to include things that are non essential or irrelevant. Your activities need to support the objectives, be challenging, keep the students' attention. You want to provide a time for reflection. That's what your close is for, of course. They need to be relevant. You need to have student-student interaction. So all of these things are important. These describe your activities. So you'll notice that there aren't a list of specific types of activities, but they're describing the activities here. That's because there's no magic bullet. There's no perfect way to do anything. So when you're writing your lesson plans, it's good to begin with a model, and I'm going to offer you a couple of models to go by. For new teachers, it's good to have that structure. Just like if you were a writer and you weren't ready to write, you might make an outline first. So we're going to be looking at the direct instruction model, the Madeline Hunter model, and the gradual release of responsibility model. This is their direct instruction model. So first of all, the instructor would set the stage for learning with an introduction or your opener. Then there will be some modeling of the learning outcomes with some explanation and examples. And so this is what they call development. This is like the meat of the lesson where you're actually going to teach it, where you're going to be telling, demonstrating, modeling. And then we have guided practice, and that's where the students are going to start trying to do it themselves. And then the teacher is moving around and she's watching them, she's monitoring their practice, and she's talking with them and helping them as they work with it. Then you're going to bring the lesson to a conclusion with the closure, and then give them independent practice. Now, this is independent of teacher assistance. So independent means that they're ready to do it on their own, and then you would evaluate. So this is our direct instruction model. And all of these steps might not exactly happen at the same day. For example, you might do these parts where you have your introduction, your teaching, your guided practice, and your close. They might do the independent practice at home. And then you might go and do these types of things again. The evaluation might be later. Madeline Hunter, um, who a lot of us have studied through the years, um, she put names to a lot of steps that we use, and she talks. That's where we got the term "set" that you see in your lesson plan. It comes from anticipatory set. So it was a set of things that you do to get the students hooked so that they can anticipate what they're going to learn. And then you would, of course, talk about your objective and your purpose. The input step is where you actually teach them the knowledge or the skills, and so you give it to them. Then you're going to model. So let's say, for instance, there's a specific way that you want them to show their learning, then you might model that. And then you check for understanding. Then you give them guided practice, just like we talked about in the direct instruction model, independent practice, and then a closure. So in this model, the independent practice actually happens while the teacher is there. So it would not be homework, it would be during the class. This gradual release model, the idea behind the gradual release model is an idea that as the teacher decreases her level of responsibility in the lesson, then the student is increasing how much they're going to be learning. So the teacher decreases her responsibility, and then the student increases theirs. So it's very interesting. That's why we've got these here. So the teacher starts out, when you look at this part of the lesson, this is at the beginning, they're modeling instruction, they're doing everything, just like me right now. I'm doing most of the work. I'm in this part right here. And then if we were together in class, you would be sitting there and you would be watching. You would have a chance, of course, to ask questions, that sort of thing. In a classroom, there would be an opportunity also then, as you can see, this gets a little smaller and this gets a little bigger as now I bring in the students and we work it together. So if I were teaching a math lesson, I would be up on the board and I would be discussing and showing and modeling and demonstrating and all that. And then in the shared instruction, I would have you work the problem with me. I might, be writing and you be doing the same problem at the same time. Then after we reach, I'm watching and I'm getting an idea. I'm doing some informal assessment as we're going along, and I'm thinking, okay, I think they're ready now to try it on their own. And so, but this time, we do this guided practice collaboratively, so that maybe you and a partner or as a class. So I might say, okay, try this with your shoulder partner. You all work this problem together. Or I might have you have the students go up to, I might put one on the board and have you all tell me how to do it. And that would be like guided practice. And then you try the independent practice finally. So you would do it alone. So this is the teacher gradually releases her responsibility. And the student is gradually getting more responsibility. His responsibility is becoming greater. I love this model, and this I picked up, and it's a really good kind of a way of thinking about what might be going on at these different parts. So here's the focus lesson, the guided instruction, the collaborative part, and the independent. So here gives you an idea. It's teacher led, down here to student led. So at the beginning, the teacher's doing everything, and by the end, the student should be able to do some things like self-monitor, apply the learning, problem solve, self-evaluate. To get there, we're going to have some modeling, um, so while the teacher is modeling, the learner is going to be observing, maybe participating a little bit, listening, very passive. And then the guided instruction, we go from really passive to doing some stuff here, trying it, participating. So the teacher might be guiding and leading. They're starting to do a little bit more collaboratively. Um, Again, what the teacher might do, and the learner is practicing now and self-correcting, we hope, and then independently. Um, so at this point, the teacher is not doing very much except really giving feedback and responding, and it's mainly the learner that's got the majority of responsibility. Oh, I like this model because I made it. So I made it to show um, that, again, the teacher's responsibility shrinks while the student's responsibility increases. But another aspect of what the teacher is doing, what the student is doing, also the support that the students need. So students should be needing less and less support as they become more independent. So again, the teacher is providing um, has more responsibility toward the lesson, at the same time more responsibility toward adding supports. And here's what it looks like when you fill it in. So this is what I call my instruction engagement differentiation model. Students, you can, if you were to use this model, you would write your objective here, and then you identify the assessment. And how do you get there? So for example, if excuse me, your lesson objectives were to list the causes of the Civil War and then justify the entrance into the war. And then if your assessments for formative and summative were here, what does the teacher do? So the teacher is going to be lecturing on the causes of the Civil War. That's um, very teacher centered, very input oriented. The student will be taking notes. So they're engaged, but they're listening, they're writing things down. Um, you can support them with guided notes. So teacher does, student does, what kind of support could you give? Then after the lecture, there would be maybe a group work assignment that gives some of uh, the responsibility now to the student. The student is going to start researching causes for the Civil War, and while the student's doing that, the teacher's going to monitor the groups and walk around and make sure everyone seems to know where they need to be looking and finding the information and helping as needed. And then the support that the students would be getting would be the they're working in a group, so they have each other for support. They can maybe use their textbook, their notes. There might be a graphic organizer that you might provide to give them guidance on this. And then if they once they research, they would present. And so that's an even bigger than responsibility than research, and then taking a position. So this model is a great way of showing how you can instruct, engage, and differentiate. So it's one of the things that I like about our lesson plan at ETSU is that we do really make you think about what the students are doing. It becomes less teacher focused and more student focused. And on a continuum of teaching, uh, a new teacher tends to be very focused on what they are doing and not what the students are doing. And that's one of the things you get better at as you become a veteran teacher. You stop thinking so much about, okay, what do I do now? What do I do next? Blah, blah, blah. As a new teacher, you might even have note cards or a piece of paper to show you what to do. But as you become a more experienced educator, a lot of that will fall by the wayside. But you still need to be thinking and planning about what you're going to be doing. It's just that it's going to be coming much more naturally, giving you the opportunity to think about what the students are doing. So again, in the focus lesson, what is the teacher doing? What are the students doing? This would be a great thing to take a screenshot of. This could help you with filling out that part of your lesson plan where you have to think about what the students are going to be doing. And I really like this because one of the things that I've found is that, where am I going to put myself? I'll put myself right there in that corner. So this is what I really love. When you start thinking about what the students are doing, let's stay away from saying things like students will write down, students will uh, sit up. Students will get in line. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about where they are cognitively and effectively and psychomotor. So we deal a lot in the classroom, of course, with the cognitive domain. So when you start talking about what the students are doing, let's get away from these little verbs like they're going to write and list and that sort of thing. How about that they're going to evaluate or describe or identify? Let's think about these types of Bloom's verbs for your cognitive domain. Or if you're trying to get them to uh, listen and just respond, a lot of this needs to be in a lot of our lessons. So you might be asking them to, um, for example, defend or help or follow. So these are some things that are in the affective domain. Now, psychomotor domain, that is bigger with more performance-based type subject areas. Okay, so this is where we are in the lesson plan template. Remember this part right up here, and it seems to be the place people mostly forget. So we've already filled out the top part of the lesson plan where you've talked about the informal assessments and the formal assessments, and you've talked about the academic language and all that stuff. That what you're going to do now is tell when this comes in the lesson. So you've filled in the set, you've filled in the closure. Now what comes in between? Teacher does, student does, modifications. And what our rubric tells us is that we need a wide variety of strategies and step-by-step clear instructions for both the teacher and the students. So when you write out your lesson plans, we want those lesson plans to be, at this point, so detailed that a substitute teacher could follow them. when your supervisor reads over your lesson plans, they need to be detailed to the point where they can kind of imagine what the lesson is going to look at. We recognize that this is not the kind of lesson plan that your mentor is writing, and uh, that's fine with us. We don't have any problem with that because you're not your mentor. You are not a veteran teacher. And so until you are, you have a different set of rules for you. And our lesson plan helps us to know whether or not you're learning how to teach and how to put all these parts together. So it's like your formative assessment to show how you're learning. You want to make sure that you have a variety of teaching strategies, not just guided practice and independent practice over and over again. So here's some examples of some students' work, which is good. And this one, the student has got things fairly lined up. It's not real clear when the student's going to mirror the teacher's actions. But when you look at this one, then they've put the numbers. So we see that this person, what they're doing, this teacher does here, corresponds with what the student does here. And then even here, teacher does, student does. And we can see that this modification or support is coming along with step 7. So this is a preferable way to do it. Again, a lot of the TTW, the teacher will, the student will, that's fine. I don't really see it as necessary because it seems redundant to me because you already have at the top teacher and at the top student. So the TTW seems a little redundant, but whatever, that's fine. And this person has talked about what they're going to do throughout the lesson, which is one way of doing it. It's okay. But I do like that they have matched up the steps. Very nice looking, very linear, step by step, looks good. Again, another example. All these different turn and talk, model students thinking, ask students for textual evidence, student will turn and talk. And she talks about here, I'm going to do the I do, we do, you do, encourage, you do. She talks about the we do. She's got the name of the game, all those things. So your lesson as you plan it, the biggest thing, important thing you need to remember about your lesson is that it needs to help your students get from point A to point B. Your students need to be able to do the assessment that you've got planned. So you have come up with the learning goals, you have devised an assessment. How do you get the students ready for the assessment? Assessments in so many classes. I know you've had a class where the test, you're given a test by a teacher or a professor, and you're like, oh, we never learned any of that, or we never practiced any of that. And it feels like a gotcha moment. So it's not teaching to the test to prepare students to learn the material that's being tested. Teaching to the test means that you are teaching them how to take the test. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about making sure that at a minimum they've learned the material that they're going to be tested on. So I hope that you have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you again in our next module. Bye.